I made this scene a while ago, and as you can see, it incorporates this Cthulhu model, which is available at daz3d.com. Some content of my own, HDRI backdrop by Horo, uses true ambience effect and depth of field. And I noticed when I rendered this, there appeared to be this glowing outline here on the wing, around his hand, here, around his legs. And I thought this was something to do with the incompatibility of depth of field effect and true ambience. But looking more closely at this, I noticed the outline only really affects the bit where he overlaps the backdrop. Looking at the backdrop settings, I've got it set. Now if you go into the Sky and Fog and then Skylab and IBL tab, and we'll load a HDRI image to show you this. So I've created this straightforward HDRI image that I'm using as a backdrop, so I'll add it to the sky, set the quality down. The backdrop's level of depth of field, the way it interacts with depth of field effect, can be controlled. So here, 100% interaction. So to show this, I'll use render in scene and get some light in the scene. To show this, I'm going to have to set the scene up appropriately. So I'll turn the atmosphere off and add to sky, and so here we are in a straightforward render. And now I'm going to, I wonder if the creaky noises is my headphones creaking. Sorry, that's just problems with videos today. Every time I record this creaky noises, I've been thinking, wonder where it comes from, but now I'm beginning to wonder if it's the headphones that are creaking. So I'll have to go back and check that. Anyway, right, back on topic. I've created three things here, and the center cylinder is the one that I'm going to set in focus. So if I go into the render options, premium effects, and set depth of field, I'll set this raise per pixels down so it renders more efficiently. Set to current selection sets it on the origin of that object from this camera view, and I'll use a wide lens radius, so it's a strong effect. And so as things stand, that's in focus. The background's very much out of focus. That's too far away and that's too close, so they're out of focus. But if I use this control here, I can exclude it from the depth of field effect, the background entirely from the depth of field effect. And so we've got a bit of this conflict, because we've got something that's infinitely far away that's in focus and something that's right in front of us that's in focus. And so this, to some degree, in some way, is where that outlining effect came from. And so I wondered if this knowledge of how depth of field effect works and how it interacts with the background could be exploited to create some kind of interesting effect. So first of all, really need to understand how depth of field effect actually produces the blurring effect. Now, it's been received wisdom, I can't remember who told me, probably Dan Whiteside, who has font of all knowledge about these things, that it's the camera that is dithered around that creates the effect. So I thought, to test this, what I'll do is I'll move the camera so it's very close to the ground, in which case if it's moved around to create the effect, at some point it should be moved to the other side of the ground, in which case I should be able to see things as if viewed from underground, and that will sort of help confirm that this is the effect. So here you go, the camera's close to the ground, we're seeing the underneath, the bottom half of these letters, which shouldn't be possible because the camera's set above a solid surface. And you can see the top of those letters as well. So the camera's moving around and seeing more of the top than the bottom, which is why there's sort of a grey effect there. And if you can move the camera, let's see, a little bit further up, it's only just breaking through, and if it's moved a bit further up again, then it doesn't get through the ground at all. But if we, not in the attributes of this, we need to change the lens radius. So if we double the lens radius, now the dithering should be sufficient again to move down onto the ground. If I utilise this background then as a spherical map, so I can just export it here. So if I go export image and then choose spherical, I could then use that to apply to an object that I can then use for further testing. So we'll do that. So I'll create a cube in the material lab using ambient. I'll light it with ambient rather than HDRI, get the picture and load in a spherical map for this. So here's a spherical map. So of course I've got to use spherical mapping on that. I'll use actual selection. You can see the cube sides are now the faces of the cube. And I'm going to go into the Skylab and just get rid of any lighting from the HDRI backdrop, so that'll speed the render time up. And then I'll set the global ambient up so that it's coming through the ambient channel so I can see my cube. Oh, and I think I'll also turn off as a background so we don't have any interference. So now I've got my cube in this scene. and I'm going to position this cube right in front of the camera. So if I take the camera and set that down at the origin of the scene, then take the cube, and that's already close to the origin because I've just created it, and place it right in front of the camera, and then modify the attributes of the camera so that it's got a 90-degree field of view. So those are the settings that do that for me, and change the document setup so it's a 1:1 ratio. I'm now rendering the front face of the cube. Now what I want to do, well, first of all, is set the depth of field effect so that it's on the front face of the cube. So that's easy enough. I can slide this cube forward. This is the origin, that's where the effect is set. Look from the camera view, go into render options, set current selection, and then just slide the cube back again, and then you'll see that it's in focus. We can't see the outer edges. And then I'm going to set the focus to the origin where it is now. So if I set it to where it is now and render, the front is out of focus, and you can see just about a little bit of colour coming from the sides. And the reason is that the camera is being dithered so far that it can see the sides. So if I increase the lens radius again, you can see more of the sides. Now you can actually see clearly at this point, I'll use the overhead view here, where this is the line which everything's in focus. So it's like a longitudinal line, is it? Yeah, I think so. Or an equator view sideways on anyway. All equidistant from the camera means they're all in focus, and this is where the words are printed, and you can see that we're not seeing much of the red because the red's been scattered across the entire front view, which is why it's gently tinted red, but we are seeing the sides. And as you increase the lens radius, you see more of the sides. So now what I'm thinking, right, if I now shove the cube back there, we can have the front in focus and we're seeing the sides, and it looks like the sides are glowing. So this could be exploited to create some kind of effect. What I've got is a bit of an issue because I'm using a very large lens radius. If I place anything here to try and light the sides up, I'm going to have difficulty getting all of it in focus. In fact, I shall use a model to show you this. So I've got the Stanford Dragon he'll do. So I'll just shrink this model down, put him in the focus area, I'll lower him down here, okay, rotate him round, and now I'm going to need to light him probably. Let's see how it looks at the moment. Not very well lit. So I'll just put the default grey material on. I'll get rid of that cube, and then I'll put the sunlight back in, so I've got a light source that's illuminating Mr. Dragon here. And now you can see, yes, it's a bit dark. I'll increase the intensity of the light source just to pick out a bit of detail. Now you can see that there's a problem that, as I was saying, the lens radius is so wide, the distance, here's the focus bit here, the distance from the front to the back is significant. So what I want to do, I want to create like a glowing edge effect by exploiting this movement, the dithering of the camera, but I can't see all of my dragon in focus. So, and also there's going to be issues about the background. We already know though we can cheat with the background. If we can get it on a HDRI, we can make it visible. But then what if we've got a surface in the scene? So there's a few different challenges to overcome here. Right, let's put a ground plane in, so that'll give us something else. So I just want that to be underneath the dragon there, and we'll make that slightly reflective default grey. So we've got a bit of a reflection to work with. You can't see the reflection at the moment. And we'll have a sky. What should we have in the sky? I suppose I can reset the sky. It's worth knowing how to do this. You turn the HDRI image off, and then if you go Ctrl Z, that'll reset you to where you were before, but will be without an image. If you want to reset the sky as normal, use Reset Sky, or any resetting of the sky by turning the image off. You must remember to turn the shadow intensity back up to 100. That's important. So, as you can see, the preview view here doesn't incorporate the depth of field effect in here. Things are very much out of focus. So we'll use this scene to build our effect now. So first of all, what I need to do is turn off the depth of field effect and render a default scene so everything's in focus. So that's our default scene. It won't take very long to render, it's just reflections that added a bit to the render time there. And so I'm going to save that as my in focus scene. Just waiting for that to complete. Okay, file, save as, in focus. The next thing to do is select the object and create an object mask. So we can do that here and render. So that's our object mask. Why is that so slow? Oh, because I've turned depth of field off, but I'm still using premium effects. It'd be quicker if I used regular. So there you go. That's probably why it took a bit too long last time. Right, file, save as, and we'll put that as object mask. Right, now to do this trick, what I need to do, I'll get rid of the ground plane here, it's not going to help us now, is I'll turn this dragon, using the edit menu here, into a terrain, and then edit the terrain and use a picture that I've just created, which is my object mask. And I must remember to check to solid, because sometimes you get light coming through, which is very annoying. And in the material lab I use ambient channel picture, and I'll load in the in focus image, check out of there, put in ambience. Now because I reset the sky, ambience was set to grey, and I want it white, and I want the atmosphere off. So that's our, actually I'll leave the atmosphere, what was I on? I want the atmosphere on just this moment, because I'm going to capture the sky, and I'm going to use a higher resolution sky, because it's going to be just to show you one or two options we've got with this system. So there I've got that sky saved in the HDRI image. We don't want any light from it. The sun's been disabled, that's fine, I was going to do that anyway, and I've got ambient. If I hold Control and Alt and click on this terrain, it'll reset its size, and I'm going to rotate it round so we can get this bit is in focus. So here we go, where how big our dragon's got. And remember to turn object mask off. So let's see how much of the screen is the dragon filling. Quite a bit. So I don't want that control. Go back. I want to reduce the thickness of that terrain. So I'll use the Z control there, and that's sort of more or less appropriate size. I'll make the terrain slightly larger so we don't see around the edges. So you can see at the moment, just with a regular render, that now we've got it mapped onto the terrain, this sort of, because of the perspective we're seeing inside this edge. Now we'll go into render options, premium effects, depth of field, and we'll have a quick render of that. Okay, so we're all out of focus now, so we need to know where this front edge is. I could do that if I make that very thin, and then go into render options from the camera view, set to current selection. Then that will get us that front edge. But because the lens radius is so large, even setting it very thin is not accurate enough. So what I'll do is I'll create a sphere that can act as a target to help me pick out the very fine detail needed to target this. And the precision involved in using depth of field and lenses and things like that explains why depth of field doesn't work with either the anaglyph generation method or the spherical mapper, because those both require very high precision setup, and the dithering movement of the camera breaks that setup. So here I've positioned the sphere along the front edge. Then if I go into this view, I can hide the sphere, so I don't need to see that in the render. I can then use that as a target, so I've got a very precise setting for where that front edge is, and it should now be in focus, whereas the other bits falling out of focus, and the edge bits which were moving away from the camera are out of focus. And now what I can do, so I'll just thicken it up, not the sphere, I'll thicken the terrain up a little bit, but leaving that front edge where it is, so that remains in focus. You can see you can control how to focus the backgrounds going. Obviously that might be a bit of a problem if I didn't want the background out of focus. If I go into the terrain here and use this menu, I can get the bottom edge of this bracket, which is sometimes a difficult control to get hold of, and make the background burgundy, and that means it won't get drawn. So now we've got the background that's infinitely far away, which is why I saved the HDRI image of the sky, because I now use that as a backdrop, add to sky, and exclude it from the depth of field effect, which means I can get that in focus. But unfortunately, I've lost the ground. And if I create a ground, so Control and create ground plane, and then place that underneath this, I'm going to run into the problem of it getting dithered all over the place because of the camera, because I'm using such a large lens radius, so I can't add the ground in that way. But I want that ground bit to be in focus, and we'll come to why in a second. So it should hopefully make sense by the time we're done. So if I put the ground back in here, and instead I'll use raise lower control and make the dragon very faint, invert and use subcontours, and then invert again, that gives me an outline. And these two levels, the inside of the dragon and the outside dragon, are quite close now, so I can now got to try and work out where this plane is in focus for the raised level. So I'll move that around there and widen it, so there should be a horizontal surface which represents the inside of the dragon, which I think is about there. Right, so now I'll use set to current selection again and render that. So now I've got the dragon in focus and the background's closer to being in focus. If you can get just the outline sticking out with very careful adjustments, then you can get both of them in focus. So I'll use render options to lower the radius again, and we'll come to adding our effect now. So this edge here, this blurred bit, is actually the steep edge sticking out, so that's getting blurred quite a bit at the moment, so I'll just keep reducing that, and I want to be able to pick that out to create my effect. So what I shall do is I shall select the train and modify its material. The material property here, this is where our main image is coming from. If I hold the control key down and click on channel C, I can get 3 of the channels in. In this channel, first of all, I'm going to have just white, full white. That's the Camtasia of making that menu stay. I'll go back into the material. There I've got my full white. In this channel, if I go to Basic and select Slope, I can now filter for the slope. The slope's appearing on the vertical surfaces and the image is appearing on the horizontal surfaces, which has this effect. That's exactly the wrong way round. So I can either move everything round, or I could modify this so that it's the slope, so it's probably easier to move it. So if I just group everything together and rotate it round like so, I can now have it the other way round, and that gives me a sort of a glowing edge effect. It's not glowing very much, but that depends how much light is falling on it and how that's being applied. So if I want to change that from being just pure white, I can go into the material here and choose a different so there's like this one. Actually I've got to think of one more appropriately scaled up here, rainbow material, which is another tutorial that shows you how to make this material. Here we go. And if I get the scaling right on that, so it's got to be, I think this one's got to be 10 10 10, and spherical mapped, you can see hopefully that you can create a rainbow coloured outline. Now at the moment it's not looking tremendously glowy, and that the combination of how much depth of field effect you have here in the terms of the lens radius, so that can be modified, and then it spreads out more, and also the light that's falling on it. So if we modify the materials again, I get a bit crafty, or if that's creaking again, that's my headphones, and put the diffuse under the control of these ambient colours here, the effect colours, and put a picture in the ambient. So I'll change that to the picture, that's coming automatically, and then change this first channel here back to a texture, and then pull out, I should have a fully black one, or I can make a fully black one quite easily. So there we go. Right, so now I'll need some diffusion on that. I can have that lit in a different way. So that's gone completely because it's got no diffuse light. If I go into here and set the atmosphere to fully white, I can then create a fully white HDRI. I don't need to cast shadows. I don't need very high quality, and I can include just, well, it doesn't matter, everything can be included. It's not really, because there's nothing else in there, so I'll not worry about including. If there were more objects, then I'd have to include just the terrain, but as it happens, it doesn't really matter. I just don't need to exclude anything. And increase that. Then the diffuse light is going to light the effect. You can see it here, so I probably don't need that much. Let's see, 20, there we go. So I can control the level of glow through the diffuse light arriving on the effect, so it can seem more glowy, and the ambience just controlling the overall effect of the image. So that's one way of doing that. Obviously that outline's quite broad. If you used higher resolution terrains, you could get a finer outline, and obviously the noise levels are controlled by the rays per pixel. So if you want less noise in the image overall, then you need to render with higher rays per pixel, and that will give you a better quality finished image there. So there you go. That's a rather exotic way of using the depth of field effect to create a glowing outline effect. I hope you found that interesting.